Alright, let's be honest, nobody loves a good crisis more than news outlets. We practically salivate at the chance to slap a big, red, breaking news banner across the screen, even if it's just about a cat stuck in a tree. But the truth is, there are some genuinely worrying trends emerging globally. We're talking about countries teetering on the precipice of utter collapse. And no, this isn't some dystopian movie plot, this is the reality for millions right now. From crippling economic meltdowns to political turmoil that would make a reality TV show blush, the next few years are going to be crucial for these nations. So, over the next few minutes, we're going to dive deep into the stories of 10 countries staring down the barrel of potential collapse by 2025. We'll unpack the complex web of issues pushing them to the brink and, hopefully, leave you with a better understanding of just how precarious things are. Lebanon, a nation once dubbed the Paris of the Middle East. These days it's less about chic cafes and more about a catastrophic economic implosion. Since 2019, Lebanon has been locked in a downward spiral, with its currency in freefall. We're talking hyperinflation so extreme that the cost of basic necessities has become utterly unattainable for everyday people. Imagine your grocery bill quadrupling overnight. That's the reality for the Lebanese. The banking system? Let's just say it's about as functional as a chocolate teapot. People can't even access their own savings, and hunger is becoming a terrifying reality for many. International aid is desperately needed to rebuild crumbling infrastructure, but there's a catch: Lebanon's political system. It's about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Political dysfunction is rampant, with corruption and infighting hindering any meaningful reform. Until that changes, Lebanon's future remains precariously balanced on a knife's edge. Venezuela's story is one of immense natural wealth squandered by a toxic cocktail of corruption and authoritarianism. For years, the Maduro regime has clung to power like a barnacle on a whale, using tactics straight out of a dictator's playbook. We're talking rigged elections, brutal crackdowns on dissent, and a complete disregard for human rights. Venezuela remains entrenched in a deep political and economic crisis, with electoral fraud being a key element sustaining Nicolas Maduro's authoritarian regime. The country's 2018 and 2024 presidential election was widely condemned as illegitimate, marred by voter suppression, manipulation, and the exclusion of key opposition figures. This has led to widespread protests, which are frequently met with violent crackdowns by security forces, resulting in arrests, human rights abuses, and the persecution of political dissidents. Financially, Venezuela is in chaos, with hyperinflation exceeding 200% in 2024, eroding the value of its currency and pushing millions into extreme poverty. Public services have collapsed, with shortages of food, medicine, and fuel becoming the norm. Rampant crime, including gang violence and corruption, has surged as the state loses its grip on law and order. Meanwhile, international sanctions continue to isolate Venezuela, further crippling its oil-dependent economy. The result is a humanitarian catastrophe, with over 7 million Venezuelans fleeing the country in search of better opportunities. Over 60% of the population is projected to live in poverty, with widespread shortages of food and medicine under President Nicolas Maduro's regime. It's no wonder millions have fled the country, desperate to escape the economic and political nightmare. Speaking of the economy, imagine hyperinflation on steroids, and you're getting close to Venezuela's reality. The bolivar, their currency, is about as valuable as a used napkin. Basic necessities like food and medicine are in chronically short supply, and the once lauded healthcare system has been reduced to rubble. International sanctions, while well-intentioned, have only exacerbated the economic woes. Venezuela is a stark reminder that political stability and respect for human rights are not optional extras. They are the bedrock upon which any functioning society is built. Colombia, a nation long synonymous with drug cartels and guerrilla warfare, had been making strides towards peace and stability. Guerrilla groups are rearing their ugly heads, expanding their control in rural areas. Remember the ELN and the FARC dissidents? They're exploiting the government's fragile grip on power. The proliferation of guerrilla groups has led to an expansion of territorial control, and the administration's lenient stance on criminal organizations raises concerns about governance. The exclusion of Colombia from the Egmont Group, an international anti-money laundering network, following the president's publication of classified documents, underscores concerns about governance and transparency. Poor administration has led to fears of future energy blackouts, as the country ceases exploration of new oil and gas reserves, leaving the energy sector vulnerable. Colombia's future appears increasingly uncertain due to a range of sociopolitical and economic challenges. The resurgence and expansion of guerrilla groups such as the ELN and dissidents of the FARC have significantly increased territorial control, especially in rural areas. These groups exploit weak state presence, enabling them to proliferate and challenge government authority. The government's attempts to broker peace have been met with mixed results, with critics accusing the administration of being too lenient on criminal organizations. Internationally, Colombia's reputation has taken a hit. It was recently excluded from the Egmont Group, a global anti-money laundering intelligence network, after the president released classified documents related to money laundering investigations. This move has raised concerns about the current administration's handling of sensitive information and its ability to maintain international cooperation on financial crimes. Economically, Colombia's future is jeopardized by the government's halt on new oil and gas exploration, which could lead to future energy shortages. Oil has been a cornerstone of the Colombian economy, and the lack of new exploration projects puts the country at risk of energy blackouts and diminished export revenues. The failure to develop alternative energy strategies compounds these fears, and the public is becoming increasingly anxious about the country's long-term energy security. In the short term, these issues suggest that Colombia could face rising instability due to the combined effects of guerrilla proliferation, weakened international cooperation, and potential energy crises. Economic and political mismanagement could deepen social unrest, particularly as rural and marginalized communities bear the brunt of the guerrilla conflicts and deteriorating economic conditions. Add to that a looming energy crisis, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Chapter 4. Pakistan, Drowning in Debt. Pakistan, a nation with a rich history and even richer culture, is facing a financial reckoning of epic proportions. Their foreign debt has ballooned to a staggering $128 billion, and their reserves are dwindling faster than a bag of chips at a Super Bowl party. To put it bluntly, they're barely scraping by, with enough reserves to cover a measly 5 weeks of imports. Inflation is projected to hit a soul-crushing 27%, meaning the purchasing power of ordinary Pakistanis is about to get Thanos snapped. Over 40% of the population lives below the poverty line, struggling to afford basic necessities. Access to education and healthcare? Let's just say it's about as common as finding a unicorn riding a roller coaster. Pakistan desperately needs to get its financial house in order and address the underlying issues of poverty and inequality. Failure to do so could have devastating consequences for its 220 million citizens. Chapter 5. Kenya, a beautiful country grappling with corruption. Kenya, a country renowned for its stunning landscapes and vibrant culture, is unfortunately no stranger to political turmoil. Election season often feels like a contact sport, and corruption is about as ingrained as the tea culture. This toxic mix has stifled economic growth and scared off potential investors, leaving Kenya lagging behind its potential. The debt-to-GDP ratio is a gut-wrenching 73%, meaning they owe more than 2/3 of their entire economic output. And if that wasn't enough, terrorism remains a constant threat, with groups like Al-Shabaab casting a long shadow over the country. Add to that simmering ethnic tensions, inadequate infrastructure, and a youth unemployment rate that would make even the most optimistic economist weep, and you've got a recipe for instability. Kenya needs to clean up its act, tackle corruption head-on, and invest in its people, particularly the youth. Chapter 6. Belarus, Europe's last dictatorship on shaky ground. Belarus, often called Europe's last dictatorship, faces a perfect storm. Supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine has led to EU sanctions. The economy is squeezed with soaring living costs. Foreign investment has dried up and citizens feel the pinch. Economic woes are just the beginning. Systemic repression and human rights violations are rampant. The fraudulent 2020 election sparked protests and brutal crackdowns. Freedom and human rights are universal aspirations. Until change comes, Belarus's future remains bleak. Chapter 7. Ghana. An economic crisis looms. Ghana, a nation once lauded as a beacon of democracy and economic progress in West Africa, is facing a sobering reality check. Their economy is in dire straits, with inflation soaring past the 30% mark faster than a cheetah on Red Bull. The CDI, their currency, is plummeting faster than a lead balloon, and public debt is projected to exceed a jaw-dropping 80% of GDP by 2023. It's enough to give even the most seasoned economist a severe case of heartburn. This economic turmoil has sparked protests across the country, with people rightfully demanding action from their leaders. Ghana's heavy reliance on foreign financing makes it particularly vulnerable to external shocks, like the current global economic downturn. The next few years will be crucial for Ghana. They need to implement sound economic policies, diversify their economy beyond just cocoa and gold, and address the rampant corruption that's been holding them back. Chapter 8. Nigeria, a giant grappling with its potential. Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and a country brimming with potential, is sadly a case study in squandered opportunities. Despite being an oil-rich nation, they're plagued by mismanagement and corruption so deeply entrenched it would make a tick blush. Their power grid is about as reliable as a weather forecast in a hurricane, with frequent blackouts crippling businesses and leaving people in the dark. This chronic instability has scared off investors, leaving Nigeria's economy stuck in a frustrating cycle of boom and bust. The debt-to-GDP ratio is projected to hit a worrying 46.6% by 2024, a clear sign that their financial house is in dire need of a makeover. Corruption is so pervasive it's practically a national pastime, robbing the country of vital resources and exacerbating inequality. Nigeria desperately needs to diversify its economy beyond oil, tackle corruption head-on, and invest in its people, particularly its youth. Chapter 9. Ethiopia, a nation scarred by conflict. Ethiopia, a nation with a rich history and a proud people, is grappling with the devastating aftermath of a brutal civil war. The conflict has left the country scarred, with millions displaced, and a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions unfolding. The economy is in shambles, with external debt nearing a staggering $18 billion. They're now knocking on the IMF's door, hoping for a restructuring plan that will prevent a complete economic meltdown. Adding insult to injury, Ethiopia's agricultural sector, the backbone of their economy, is facing the unrelenting challenges of climate change. Droughts and floods have become all too common, decimating crops and pushing millions further into poverty. And if that wasn't enough, tensions over the Nile River, a vital lifeline for the region, are simmering, threatening to boil over into a full-blown regional conflict. Ethiopia needs peace, stability, and a concerted international effort to address the humanitarian crisis. Chapter 10. Haiti, trapped in a cycle of crisis. Haiti, a nation synonymous with resilience, is tragically trapped in a cycle of crises. Rampant gang violence has turned Port-au-Prince into a war zone. The assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021 deepened political instability. The Haitian National Police are struggling to maintain order. The economy is on life support, with inflation soaring and basic necessities in short supply. Cholera has re-emerged, highlighting the dire state of Haiti's healthcare system. Look, I get it. The world can feel like a dumpster fire on its best day. But here's the thing. Indifference is not an option. The plight of these 10 nations is a stark reminder that we live in an interconnected world. Their struggles, while seemingly distant, have ripple effects that can be felt far and wide. Ignoring their plight isn't just morally wrong, it's short-sighted and ultimately self-defeating. We need to demand better from our leaders, push for greater international cooperation, and support organizations working tirelessly on the ground to make a difference. The challenges are immense, but they are not insurmountable. The future of millions hangs in the balance, and it's time we start acting like it.